Thank you for joining us. We've got you for 10 minutes this afternoon, so if you'd like to begin your presentation.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you very much for allowing us to be heard on our submission. It's something that we feel very strongly about.
We are at a very serious crossroads. The value of the bill is that it not only forces us to confront this fact, but allows us to do so within the parliamentary select committee process.
The principles proposed in this bill cannot address the inequities that we see on a day-to-day basis in our work.
One of the really unfortunate things that I think has happened is the way that opponents of the bill have resorted to ad hominem and intimidation. I mean, calling people racists because they disagree with these fundamental aspects of New Zealand democracy.
I support the Treaty Principles Bill because it provides a coherent and succinct statement capturing what liberal democracy is.
I hope that this bill is quickly put an end to, but that misinformation will linger as long as people don't have that ability to see through it, because they don't have that historical awareness and context.
They are some of the first voices of the 300,000 people who have made submissions on the Treaty Principles Bill, speaking on the first day of hearings at the Select Committee.
This is not about special rights for Māori. It's about the recognition of pre-existing rights and the arrival of a new people in power in town and how we can coexist.
I was hoping maybe my grandchildren might have been able to come today, but I don't want to have them looking back in anger. I don't want to have my grandchildren looking back over their shoulders all the time at what is going on in this country. And the expectation that I have is that the bill was here, put in place to start the discussions.
January isn't even over, and we're in the thick of a debate about the place of Te Tiriti in our lives. I'm Sharon Brett-Kelly, and today on The Detail, the state of Māori-Crown relations. We'll hear about who is saying what at the Select Committee on the Treaty Principles Bill, the shake-up at the Waitangi Tribunal, the year's first political debate on the Pai, and what's ahead for the year.
We've kicked straight into the year, haven't we? And that was always going to happen. You know, this year was always going to be spicy. We kind of had the scene set for it at the end of last year with the hikoi, with the first reading of the Treaty Principles Bill. It's pretty significant straight away, and it's not going to stop anytime soon either.
Laura Walters is Newsroom's political editor. She was at Rātana and at the first hours of the Select Committee hearings this week.
There are a couple of things going on here, and it is really complex and on some level when you're looking at potential for legislative change, how that impacts on, say, treaty settlements or the Crown's obligation to Māori in terms of equitable outcomes, what was intended at the time of the treaty, what rights did Māori already have, how is that being recognised now, how have things changed in law and jurisprudence over the past 40, 50 years or so. That all sounds incredibly complex, but at another level, and I think we see this at events like Rātana, you know, and where there's not necessarily time to dig into complex legal or historical debates, but we get a sense of the feeling. And so there are kind of two things happening. There's almost like an academic and a legislative debate that's happening, as it should, but there's also just really people talking about how they feel at the moment. Are they feeling like they're being valued? Are they feeling like they're having a fair go? Are they feeling like the government is listening to them and what they want? There is a real strong sense from Māori that is not happening. At Rātana, we heard from, you know, a senior Māori leader from Kingitanga, Rāhui Papa, that he believed that the tenor or the vibe of Crown Māori relations is the worst that it's been in a really long time.
Well, I'm here to tell you that the state of the Māori nation is at the highest level of concern that it has been for a whole lot of years. Prime Minister, it's not about your way or the highway. It's about working together for the betterment of all.
There is a really strong depth of feeling there from people on both sides of the debate, that they want to be heard and that they're not necessarily being listened to or being given a fair go. So I think that's what jumped out at me at Rātana, also in that first day of the Treaty Principles Bill submissions, that while, yes, we are arguing and debating and discussing specific constitutional complex topics and issues, on another hand, we're just talking about who we are as a people and building our nation and what we want that to be now and into the future. And I think that there's a sense that we haven't got it right.
On that first day, David Seymour, the ACT leader, called it
a great day for New Zealand that our treaty is being debated. In a free society, people should be able to have their say about the most important issues of the day.
And then we heard from one submitter who said,
"This bill violently strikes at the heart and soul of Te Tiriti, our foundational constitutional document."
It does show that there is strong sense of feeling on both sides of the debate, and it's hard to imagine a situation in which they are going to come closer together to the centre. I think many people have decided where they stand on this, and they will not be moving, because for so many people this is fundamentally important to them. It is about rights, it is about human rights, it is about rights as tangata whenua or tangata tiriti. So you're hearing very different things on the two sides of the debate, and those were very good examples to illustrate that.
What's it like to be in there, in that room where these submissions are going on? Can you just describe it?
Honestly, by hour 8.5, it was getting pretty, not boring, but tedious. But no, it is procedural, largely. There are moments where there is something very stirring that happens, or dramatic or strange, or something that makes you scratch your head. But by and large, the select committee process is a process that MPs and a lot of these submitters, these are former politicians, legal experts, academics, people who submit to a parliamentary select committee a lot, they understand this process, they understand this procedure. So within Parliament buildings, there are rooms, select committee rooms, that are set aside for this specifically. And the members of the committee, which are MPs from, across the House, so in the Justice Select Committee, we have MPs from every party, so 3 from Labour, 4 from National, we have New Zealand First ACT, the Greens and Te Pāti Māori all represented on that committee. They sit around a table, and submitters, one at a time, come up, are given their allocated time to say what they would like to say, and then take questions from the MPs. There are general behaviour or decorum that is expected in it, that is set down in Parliament's rules. The chair can stop the committee or suspend hearings at any time, which he did briefly when there was a waiata from the public, which wasn't sanctioned. Essentially, they were cutting into someone else's time, so they suspended hearings, cleared the room. Mostly it was procedural. Mostly people came and had their say. Yes, there was tough questioning. Yes, they were controversial topics, but it was generally respectful, though quite passionate from a lot of people. There were stirring moments. I don't speak te reo Māori, but I listened to a submission from Taranaki iwi, who did their entire submission in Māori.
Nā wai kāhua, nā wai kāhua. Kaore rātou ngā morehu e hua ana, mai e rā kōrero wakaiti.
As did some others, and the last portion of their submission was a very stirring mō teatea. This will continue for 80 hours in total, will be split into subcommittees. Things I think could get fiery at points. They do sometimes on select committees, but there has been a lot of work with this committee in advance to ensure that things are respectful, that they are constructive, and there have been specific rules set down. For instance, if there's name calling, say if someone calls someone racist or bigoted, a personal attack, that will be it for them. They will be asked to leave the room.
And when you say that the committee prepared well for it? What, they set down some ground rules amongst themselves?
There was a series of internal meetings among committee members, remembering that these are MPs in this committee from different parties, so they kind of have to hash out their positions on things, what they think are acceptable rules. They did that over a series of meetings. They first met at the end of the year, and then they've met a few times earlier in this year. Committees will always do this, but this committee seems to have met more to have put down specific rules, have communicated those well with the media and with the public who are interested in the process and the procedure. Of course, there were 300,000 submissions to this.
Setting a new record, the Justice Select Committee has unanimously agreed to extend the deadline for submissions until 1 p.m. next Tuesday. It comes after Parliament's website crashed due to an unprecedented number of users making a submission at the same time.
But yes, as part of that, they did say that they were setting some rules around what was appropriate language and behaviour, and said that if submissions ran afoul of that they would just be thrown out.
And how did they actually decide who did get speaking time?
So that happens again internally among the committee members. I was not in those closed-door meetings, but I can imagine there were some heated discussions. And some of the different parties, or the government and the opposition members of the committee, also got an opportunity to essentially put forward submitters that they would like to hear from. And for the first couple of days of these submissions, these oral submissions, it's largely from well-known groups, people with a profile, with a specific expertise or experience in this area.
And with us, we have Lady Tureiti Moxon.
Kia ora koutou katoa, kānui te mihi atu ki a koutou I tēnei wā, I runga I tēnei kaupapa.
We'll move on to submission now from Mr. Gary Judd. I'm going to move to submission from Turunanga or Tōrangatira. Yep. And I'll invite Helmut Modlik to the table for us.
Oh, tēnā tātou. I confess it's difficult to be in this house for this purpose this day.
Mōrena, tēnei au te tuaki nei ki te mi, kia tātou kua taimai. Ko Christori toki ingoa, I'm here on behalf of Te Pūnaoro o mā tātou.
We'll now move to a submission from Carwyn Jones. I'll invite Carwyn up to the floor.
Kia ora, assalamu alaikum, and my name is Rizwana Nati.
Thank you very much. My name is Natasha Hamilton-Hart, and I'm a professor at a New Zealand university.
We'll go now to submission from the New Zealand Bar Association. Joining us online is the Honourable Christopher Finlayson. Mr. Finlayson, good morning. Thank you for being with us. We've got you for 10 minutes this morning. You're currently on mute. I'll allow you to unmute and then I'll hand over to you.
Unmute. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for your guidance and technical expertise.
So let's look now at the Waitangi Tribunal and why the overhaul of its members is so controversial. Alice Stewart, RNZ's in-depth Te Ao Māori journalist, says it adds up to a stormy 12 months for the tribunal.
Last year we saw a record number of urgent claims heard before the tribunal in such a short amount of time. And that was all on the coalition government policies. So we saw urgent hearings about the rolling back of Te Aka Whaiora, the Māori Health Authority. We saw it about the Treaty Principles Bill, about limiting te reo Māori use, a whole bunch within a really record time. But probably what caused the most heat was that one about the oranga tamariki. The Minister for Children, Karen Shaw, also an ACT Party member, she declined to give evidence in front of the tribunal, right? And then they called her, and then a legal kind of fight ensued. That also meant that we saw the media go directly to David Seymour, Shane Jones, kind of for comment about what they thought of the tribunal. And it kind of started this big, I suppose, kōrero and wānanga about the role of the tribunal in the modern day, what's the point?
And what's happened now is that Māori Development Minister Tama Potaka has announced quite an overhaul of the Waitangi Tribunal. 8 new members?
8 new members in January this year, but we also saw 2 new members in October last year as well.
How many members are there altogether?
It can be up to 20 members at one time. Right? And they're appointed for 3 years by the Governor-General with recommendation through Tama Potaka. The tribunal's website says that they come from all walks of life and that the tribunal is made up of half Pākehā and half Māori. And so we saw in October 2 new members appointed and 1 person reappointed. And then in early January, Potaka announced this 8 new appointments, right? As well as the reappointment of 5 existing members. Now, bear with me because I know it's a lot of numbers. That means that the majority of the existing members, 11 of them, will soon no longer be part of the tribunal. Lots of people are reappointed for years and years, but this time, Pōtaka decided, let's get some new people in. And he's saying it's a bit of a refresh, right? A refresh of the sorts of people we can have on, the sort of experience they bring. And actually, the spin-off made a really interesting observation, which was that the new appointments tend to have held kind of high-level leadership roles in business, experience in policy advising, law, local politics, whereas the departing members are more academics and historians.
If it is a revolving kind of thing, why has Tama Pōtaka been accused of whitewashing the tribunal?
I mean, I think this is all set in the current political kind of atmosphere that's going on and everything that's been building. So I think tensions are a bit heightened, but we also saw 3 people in particular kind of booted out, if you will.
One of those 3 is Professor Tom Roa, Tainui leader and Waikato University academic. He tells our producer Davina Zimmer that he's served 10 years on the tribunal and he doesn't feel he's been dumped.
I would have been happy to serve for another term, but I don't feel that I've been dumped and that I regard this as a normal part of the process of the tribunal.
What do you make of the new makeup, the refresh, as the government calls it, of the main tribunal?
That's the minister's prerogative. That's the government's. That's their task. I don't play a role in that. I do assert that the tribunal has a role under the Treaty of Waitangi Act 1975, and that role guides how the membership approaches the role of the tribunal. So it pays for everybody to know what function the tribunal serves according to the Act, and that when we sit on the tribunal, we as members should know that inside out, so that all that we do when we sit as members of the tribunal, we ensure that we embody and follow through on the function of the tribunal.
Do you think that the selections that Tama Pōtaka has made reflect that?
That's not really my lane. I know my lane, and I stick to my lane. I welcome that people express their concerns. I personally don't share the concern because, number one, I know what the function of the tribunal is, and the new membership should make themselves very familiar with that function. Secondly, I have a trust of the membership that is still there, that they will ensure that the function of the tribunal, according to the Act, is followed through on.
But Te Pāti Māori has kicked up a fuss over the most controversial new members on the tribunal, including former ACT leader Richard Prebble. Here's Ella again.
And we saw Te Pāti Māori as well use social media to cause a storm. I mean, they have been using quite interesting ways of communicating with voters, and in particular, they've been doing lots of stuff on social media. In my circles of Te Ao Māori on social media, I saw everyone repost the post that they made about it being a whitewash, because we saw 3 new people come in, which is Philip Crump, who's a kind of former conservative blogger, and also he comes from a law background. We saw Grant Hadfield. He's a councillor of the Manawatu district, and he also is quite well known for being against Three Waters.
What has been the reaction from your contacts, from the people that you deal with, you know?
I think people have been pretty outraged. People have been concerned that this is kind of going in under the guise of it's a refresh, but people are worried that it is indicative of, you know, a movement to narrow the scope of the tribunal, because that's what they've said. They've said they'll do a review, right? They haven't said they're going to narrow the scope of the tribunal, but they've said in the coalition agreements they want to review the tribunal. And people are kind of wondering, what is the purpose of reviewing the tribunal if you're not to narrow or possibly get rid of it?
Let's look at the role of the tribunal, because actually, does it have any power?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one, right? Because the tribunal is a standing commission of inquiry. So its job is to research and kind of a fact-finding mission, and then make recommendations to the Crown based on redress and see if the Crown has breached the Treaty of Waitangi. But they don't have any, I suppose, binding powers to say to the government, you have to do this, you have to give this iwi a certain amount of money, you have to change this legislation. However, they make these recommendations, and widely the Crown does often take them on. Or at least it informs how they're going to address redress. I mean, it was established in 1975, right? And it was actually originally established to look into contemporary claims, which I think people don't realise. So previously, when the tribunal was established, no one could bring a claim to the tribunal dated before the legislation was created. So it was only looking at claims past 1975. Then 10 years later, they had an amendment to the bill which changed its remit. And it meant it could investigate historical claims. And then again, we saw an amendment in 2008, which meant no one could any longer bring historical claims to the tribunal. So the government wants to review the tribunal. They've said in their coalition agreements it's to kind of refocus the scope. But it's currently acting the way it was originally set up to do.
So, to recap, we're in the middle of 80 hours of submissions on the Treaty Principles Bill. The Waitangi Tribunal's had a shake-up and faces more upheaval. We've got Waitangi Day coming up, but Laura says that's not all.
The very beginning of this year, there was a wānanga amotu. You'll remember last year we had the hui amotu that was started by the late Kingi Tuheitia, which kind of brought iwi together in the spirit of kotahitanga, talking about the way forward for te iwi Māori. And that has been continued this year, but in a more focused way, I guess. And the first wānanga that happened this year in Hawke's Bay, my colleague Mark Dalder went along to, and iwi there were calling for greater dialogue between Crown and tangata whenua around constitutional reform. They're also discussing something akin to a separate Māori parliament that doesn't mirror parliament but has the ability, gives, Māori more self-determination, more decision-making power, independent decision-making power there. And at the same time, we have the Waitangi Tribunal that is, has a kaupapa inquiry into constitutional reform underway. So on that side of the debate, we do have people saying we do need to have a broader constitutional discussion. On the other side, we have people saying, we think that the principles of te tiriti do need to be defined, that they have moved and shifted, and there's a lot of misunderstanding around the principles. So let's legislate, let's define them in law. And then everyone in the middle is just going, hey, I need to learn more about this, so why not have a discussion and educate ourselves?
And if it's not done this way through a select committee, how else could this debate take place?
There are a few different ways this could happen. I mean, just to your point on whether there's a life for this beyond this specific bill, two submitters brought up the possibility of a citizens-initiated referendum. A barrister and a legal professor or a law professor both said, hey, while this bill might be voted down, people do have the ability to launch a citizens-initiated referendum, which would mean about 10% of the voting population, so it's hundreds of thousands of people, I guess, would need to agree to that, and then it could be on the ballot next time. Do you agree to the Treaty Principles Bill or whatever the wording would be? Of course, that would be a non-binding referendum, but that would give it life. This bill and this concept, that would give it life beyond what we're discussing right now. Then there are other ways forwards. I guess there could be the potential for a written constitution in New Zealand. There could be space to upgrade or amend the Bill of Rights Act. A lot of it is big stuff. It would take time. And the sense is that this can't happen from an MP, or, a certain MP or a certain, minor, when we look at the vote share, political party from initiating a single piece of legislation.
That's all for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and NZ On Air. This episode was engineered by Rangi Poick and produced by Gwen McClure and Davina Zimmer. Thank you to Laura Walters, Alice Stewart and Tom Raw. I'm Sharon Brett Kelly. Mā te wā.